President Ibrahim Traoré had deliberately chosen this commercial flight over the state aircraft, a calculated decision that would soon prove far more consequential than he could have imagined. Settling into seat 17B, Traoré adjusted his baseball cap and opened a worn paperback book. 3 days of secret diplomatic meetings in Paris had been exhausting but productive. The uranium mining negotiations with European consortiums had reached a critical juncture, and his unexpected presence at the bargaining table had shifted the balance of power dramatically in Burkina Faso's favor. No fanfare, no motorcades, no diplomatic immunity, he had told his security chief before departing. Sometimes a president needs to disappear among his people. Now 35,000 feet above the Mediterranean, that decision would be tested in ways he never anticipated. The first 3 hours passed peacefully. Passengers dozed, read, or watched movies on their screens. Flight attendant Céline Moreau moved through the cabin with practiced efficiency, serving beverages and checking on passengers. The elderly Burkinabe woman beside Traoré, Mama Fatou, had struck up a gentle conversation about her grandchildren waiting in Ouagadougou. "You have kind eyes, my son," she had said. "You remind me of my eldest grandson. He serves in the army." Traoré had smiled, not revealing that he might well command that grandson. Then, everything changed. The turbulence hit first violent, unnatural shaking that sent drinks flying and overhead compartments snapping open. But experienced passengers knew this wasn't weather. The shuddering movements were too deliberate, too controlled. "Ladies and gentlemen," the captain's voice crackled over the intercom, strained and unnatural. "We are experiencing some difficulties. Please remain in your seats with your seatbelts fastened." At row 12, 4 men stood simultaneously. They moved with coordinated precision that spoke of military training, not the random panic of nervous passengers. The glint of metal in the lead man's hand settled the matter definitively. "Nobody move," shouted their leader in accented English, his voice cutting through the cabin like a blade. "This aircraft is now under our control. Follow our instructions and no one will be harmed." Panic rippled through the cabin in waves. A child began crying. Someone whispered prayers in Arabic. The businessman across the aisle from Traoré fumbled for his phone before thinking better of it. Traoré sat perfectly still, his trained mind automatically cataloging details. 4 hijackers. 2 moving toward the cockpit. 2 controlling the passenger cabin. Professional movements, but nervous energy. The leader's accent suggested North African origin. Their demands would come soon. "All electronic devices will be collected," announced the hijacker stationed at the rear of economy class, a thin man with a carefully groomed beard. "Phones, tablets, anything with a signal. Do not resist." Traoré quietly slipped his secure satellite phone deep into the seat pocket, using his book to shield the movement. Protocol demanded he signal his security team, but premature action could endanger everyone aboard. The hijacker who had spoken first clearly their commander returned from securing the cockpit. He was perhaps 35, with the lean build of a former soldier and eyes that had seen too much violence. "My name is Youssef Al-Maghribi," he announced to the cabin. "We are not here to harm you. We have taken control of this aircraft to achieve justice for our imprisoned brothers." He gestured toward the cockpit. "Our demands are simple. $10 million and the immediate release of 3 political prisoners from Lannemezan prison in France. Malik Al-Zaim, Riyad Hamadi, and Omar Ben Aliman, imprisoned for fighting against French neocolonialism in West Africa." Traoré's pulse quickened. He knew those names. The 3 had been arrested 7 years ago for allegedly supporting Tuareg separatists in Mali, but their capture had always seemed suspiciously convenient for French mining interests in the region. "Until our demands are met," Youssef continued, "this aircraft will remain in the air. Cooperate and you will all return safely to your families." As the hijackers began collecting devices, Traoré studied Youssef's demeanor. Unlike professional terrorists, this man showed signs of ideological commitment mixed with operational inexperience. His hands trembled slightly not from fear, but from the weight of responsibility for 183 lives. "Don't worry, child," Mama Fatou whispered beside him, her weathered hand finding his arm. "God protects the innocent." "He does, Mama," Traoré replied softly. "But sometimes he works through ordinary people." Hours passed. The aircraft had deviated from its flight path, circling over Mali while negotiations proceeded through the cockpit radio. Fuel levels were dropping, and tension among the hijackers was visibly increasing. Traoré watched Youssef pace the aisle, speaking in rapid Arabic with his companions. Something was going wrong with their plan. The French government wasn't responding as expected. Then, the situation escalated. "The negotiators aren't taking us seriously," Youssef said loudly, his composure cracking. He grabbed a middle-aged French businessman from an aisle seat, pressing a pistol to the man's temple. "Perhaps they need motivation." The man's wife screamed. Their teenage daughter began sobbing uncontrollably. This was the moment Traoré had been dreading. Reveal his identity now, and he could become either the ultimate bargaining chip or the trigger for an international catastrophe. Stay hidden and watch innocent people die. He made his choice. Stop. Traoré's voice cut through the chaos with quiet authority. He stood slowly, removing his sunglasses and cap. Violence will only ensure you never see your brothers again. Youssef swiveled toward him, the gun now pointed in Traoré's direction. "Who are you to tell me what to do?" "Someone who understands negotiation," Traoré replied calmly. "Someone who studied the cases of Malik, Riyad, and Omar. Their situation is more complex than you realize." "You know about our brothers?" Youssef's voice carried surprise and suspicion in equal measure. "I know their trials were rushed. I know the evidence against them was circumstantial. And I know the French government has been looking for a way to resolve their cases without appearing weak." Traoré took a careful step forward. "But this approach guarantees they'll never be released." Youssef studied him with new interest. "You're not just a passenger." "No," Traoré agreed. "I'm not. But before we go further, release that man. He has nothing to do with your brother's imprisonment." Something in Traoré's tone, quiet confidence of someone accustomed to being obeyed, made Youssef hesitate. After a tense moment, he released the businessman, who stumbled back to his seat. "Come to the cockpit," Youssef ordered. "Let's hear what you have to say." As Traoré moved toward the front of the plane, Mama Fatou caught his hand. "May God protect you, my son," she whispered. Looking into her eyes, Traoré realized she had recognized him despite his disguise. The cockpit was cramped with 5 people inside. Captain Jean-Luc Dubois and his co-pilot looked exhausted, their faces reflecting the strain of flying under duress for nearly 6 hours. A hijacker monitored the radio communications while Youssef's lieutenant kept watch. "Who's this?" demanded the voice on the Radiant's French crisis negotiator. "A diplomat," Youssef replied before Traoré could speak. "He claims to understand our situation." Traoré stepped closer to the radio. "My name is Ibrahim. I'm familiar with the cases of the 3 prisoners you're seeking to free. The French government has legitimate concerns about appearing to negotiate with hijackers, but there may be alternative approaches." The negotiator's voice sharpened with interest. "What kind of alternatives?" "First, let's acknowledge reality," Traoré said, his diplomatic training taking over. "These men have been imprisoned for 7 years without resolution. The original evidence was questionable. An international human rights commission could review their cases independently." Youssef leaned forward. "That's what we've been requesting for years. No one listened." "Because you were using conventional channels?" Traoré replied. "What if we could elevate this to an international platform? The United Nations Human Rights Council, perhaps, with proper legal representation and international observers." The French negotiator was silent for a long moment. "Continue. In exchange for the safe release of all passengers and crew, France would agree to an independent review of the 3 cases. If irregularities are found, appropriate remedies would be pursued through proper legal channels." "And the money?" Youssef interjected. Traoré looked at him directly. "What's your real goal? $10 million? Or justice for your brothers?" Youssef's jaw clenched. "Justice. Always justice." "Then let's pursue it the right way. International law, human rights advocacy, diplomatic pressure. These are weapons more powerful than any gun." "Why should I trust you?" Youssef asked. "For all I know, you're a French agent." Traoré smiled slightly. "I can assure you, I'm not French, and I have my own difficulties with French policies in West Africa." The conversation continued for another hour, with Traoré carefully managing both the French negotiators' concerns and Youssef's demands. Gradually, a framework began a merging conditional release of hostages in exchange for guaranteed international review of the prisoners' cases. But the most dangerous moment was yet to come. As fuel levels reached critical status and the aircraft was forced to request landing clearance, Youssef grew increasingly agitated. "They're planning to storm the plane the moment we touch down," he said. "They'll kill us all." "Not necessarily," Traoré replied. "But you need to choose your landing site carefully. Bamako, as the negotiator suggested, would be a mistake. Too much French influence." "Then where?" Traoré took a deep breath. "Ouagadougou. Burkina Faso? But they're independent," Traoré finished. "Burkina Faso has recently taken a more autonomous position regarding French influence. It would be neutral ground." What Youssef didn't yet know was that he was negotiating with the very man who had redefined that independence. As the aircraft began its descent toward Ouagadougou, Traoré prepared for the moment of ultimate truth. In 20 minutes, his identity would be revealed, and the crisis would either end peacefully or explode into international chaos. Through the window, the familiar landscape of his homeland came into view. Soon, he would discover whether his gamble with 183 lives had been wisdom or folly. The aircraft's wheels touched down at Ouagadougou International Airport with the gentlest of impacts, but the tension inside the cabin remained at breaking point. Through the small windows, passengers could see vehicles surrounding the runway, military trucks, emergency response teams, and the unmistakable black SUVs of special forces. "They're everywhere," Youssef muttered, peering out from the cockpit. His hands shook as he gripped his weapon. "We're trapped." "Not trapped," Traoré corrected quietly. "Arrived. There's a difference." The radio crackled to life. "Air France 726, this is Ouagadougou Control. You are cleared to taxi to Gate 7. Emergency vehicles are standing by." "What now?" asked Ahmed, the youngest of the hijackers, panic creeping into his voice. "They'll storm the plane the moment we stop moving." Traoré studied the scene outside. Among the assembled vehicles, he recognized the distinctive formation of the Presidential Guard's counterterrorism unit. Major Kabore would be commanding them, following protocols he himself had helped design. "Youssef," he said, turning to the hijacker leader, "before we go any further, there's something you need to know about me." "What?" Youssef's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "You asked earlier if I was a French agent. I told you I wasn't French." Traoré paused, knowing that his next words would either save 183 lives or dooms them all. "I am Ibrahim Traoré, President of Burkina Faso." The cockpit fell into stunned silence. Captain Dubois' mouth fell open. Ahmed's gun clattered to the floor. Youssef stood frozen, his weapon still pointed toward Traoré, but his finger motionless on the trigger. "Impossible," Youssef whispered. "I'm afraid not," Traoré replied calmly, producing his diplomatic passport from an inside pocket. "I was returning from secret negotiations in Paris. I chose a commercial flight to avoid attention." Youssef's face cycled through shock, disbelief, and then dawning horror as he realized the enormity of his situation. We've hijacked a plane with the president of Burkina Faso aboard?" "You have," Traoré confirmed, "which means you now hold the most valuable hostage imaginable. The question is, what will you do with this advantage?" The implications hit Youssef like a physical blow. Harming a head of state would bring the wrath of not just France, but the entire international community. On the other hand, having such a hostage could theoretically guarantee anything he demanded. "Why didn't you tell us earlier?" Ahmed demanded, his voice cracking. "Because," Traoré replied, "I wanted to understand your motivations first, and because revealing my identity prematurely could have led to panic and tragedy." Youssef stared at him for a long moment. "You've been negotiating for us, with your own people." "I've been negotiating for everyone aboard this aircraft," Traoré corrected. "Including you." The radio sparked to life again. "Aircraft 726. This is Colonel Kabore of the Burkina Presidential Guard. We're prepared to begin negotiations for the safe release of all hostages." Youssef looked at Traoré in confusion. "Your own forces are treating you as a hostage?" "They don't know I'm aboard," Traoré explained. "I travel under assumed identities for security reasons. As far as they know, I'm still in Paris. The absurdity of the situation, a president negotiating his own rescue without his rescuers knowing, was not lost on anyone in the cockpit. "Sir," Captain Dubois spoke for the first time in hours, his voice hoarse. "What do you want us to do?" Traoré looked out at the gathering forces, then back at Youssef. "That depends on what Youssef decides. You have 3 choices now. First, you could reveal my identity and use me as your ultimate bargaining chip. The international pressure would be enormous." Youssef nodded slowly, following the logic. "Second," Traoré continued, "you could maintain the current situation and negotiate the release of your brothers through conventional hostage diplomacy. It's possible, but uncertain." "And the third option?" Youssef asked. "Trust me," Traoré said simply. "Trust that I meant what I said about justice for your brothers. Trust that sometimes the most powerful person in a room is the one who chooses not to use that power." Ahmed looked between his leader and the president. "Youssef, we could demand anything now." "Anything? Could we?" Youssef asked, his gaze never leaving Traoré's face. "Or would we simply escalate this beyond any hope of resolution?" The radio crackled again. "Aircraft 726, we're prepared to discuss terms for the release of passengers, beginning with women and children. Please respond." "Decide now," Traoré said quietly. "But remember, your brothers have been imprisoned for 7 years because people chose violence over dialogue. Don't make the same mistake." Youssef closed his eyes, the weight of 183 lives pressing down on him. When he opened them, something had changed. "Ahmed, Jamal, Hakim," he called to his companions, "come here." The 3 men gathered in the cramped cockpit doorway. Youssef spoke to them in rapid Arabic, explaining the situation. Their faces reflected the same progression of emotions he had experienced: shock, fear, and then a kind of awed understanding. "What do you want from us?" Youssef asked Traoré. "I want you to walk off this plane alive," Traoré replied. "I want these passengers to return safely to their families, and I want your brothers to receive the international legal review they deserve." "You'd guarantee that? Your word as president?" "My word as a man who understands what it means to fight for justice in Africa," Traoré said, "and who believes there's always a better way than violence." Youssef took a deep breath, then picked up the radio microphone. "Ouagadougou Control, this is Flight 726. We're prepared to begin releasing hostages." "We copy, 726. What are your terms?" Youssef looked at Traoré, who nodded encouragingly. "First, we want confirmation that Burkina Faso will host international observers to monitor our surrender and treatment. Second, we want guaranteed legal representation and protection under international law." There was a pause on the radio. "Stand by. 726. Minutes ticked by while ground control consulted with higher authorities. During the wait, Traoré saw Mama Fatou looking toward the cockpit. She raised her hand slightly and touched her heart a gesture of blessing. She had known all along who he was. "Aircraft 726, the radio finally crackled. "We can confirm that President Traoré's government has agreed to your terms. International observers will monitor your surrender and ensure your protection under international law." Youssef almost smiled at the irony. "Thank you, Control. We're ready to begin releasing hostages." The process took 2 hours. First the children and elderly, then the remaining passengers, each group carefully escorted off the aircraft by flight crew. Traoré remained aboard until the end, partly to ensure the hijackers honored their agreement, partly because his own exit required careful choreography. "You're really going to walk off this plane with us?" Ahmed asked in disbelief. "I'm going to walk off first," Traoré corrected, "to make sure my people understand the situation before you follow." When only the crew, hijackers, and Traoré remained aboard, he made his move. Standing at the aircraft door, he could see Major Kabore positioned near the gate, her sharp eyes scanning for any sign of danger. "Major," he called out, his voice carrying across the tarmac. Kabore's head snapped up, her face transforming from professional alertness to shock as she recognized his voice, then his face. "Mr. President?" she shouted back, her composure slipping for the first time in her military career. "Sir, what?" "Stand down, Major," Traoré called, descending the aircraft stairs with his hands visible and empty. The situation is under control. The hijackers are surrendering peacefully. They are to be treated according to international law. Behind him, Yusuf and his 3 companions emerged from the aircraft, their weapons discarded, hands raised. The Special Forces rifles tracked them but held fire on their president's clear command. As Traoré reached the tarmac, Major Kabore approached him, her professional mask firmly back in place, despite the questions burning in her eyes. "Sir," she said quietly, "we need to debrief immediately. The international community believes you're still in Paris. If word of this gets out..." "It will get out," Traoré interrupted. "And it should. But first, ensure these men are treated properly. They've honored their agreement to surrender peacefully." He turned to watch as Yusuf and his companions were formally arrested, but without the brutality that might have occurred elsewhere. True to his word, international observers were already arriving to monitor the process. 2 hours later, Traoré sat in the presidential palace, facing a room full of advisors, military commanders, and intelligence officials, all struggling to process what had happened. "Sir," his chief of staff said carefully, "the international implications of this are staggering. Every security protocol was violated. Your safety, my safety was never in real danger," Traoré interrupted. "These weren't terrorists. They were desperate men seeking justice for their brothers. Sometimes the greatest security comes from understanding rather than force." "But the precedent this sets," began his foreign minister. "The precedent," Traoré said firmly, "is that Burkina Faso resolves conflicts through dialogue, not violence. That we honor our commitments to international law, and that sometimes a president must be a man first and a head of state second." Later that evening, Traoré held a press conference that would be broadcast worldwide. Sitting before the assembled media, he looked every bit the leader who had just navigated his nation through a potentially explosive international crisis. "Today," he began, "I learned something about leadership that no training or experience could have taught me. When you strip away the titles, the security details, and the ceremonial trappings, a leader is simply one human being trying to find common ground with other human beings." A reporter raised her hand. "Mr. President, why didn't you reveal your identity immediately? Couldn't that have resolved the situation faster?" "Perhaps," Traoré acknowledged. "But it also could have escalated it beyond control." Yusuf al-Maghribi and his companions weren't motivated by greed or hatred. They were fighting for justice as they understood it. My role wasn't to overpower them with my position, but to help them find a better path. "What message does this send to other potential hijackers?" asked another journalist. "That violence is never the answer," Traoré replied. "But also that legitimate grievances deserve to be heard." The 3 prisoners these men were fighting for will now receive the international legal review they've requested for 7 years. Justice delayed is justice denied, but justice achieved through violence is not justice at all. As the press conference concluded, Traoré reflected on the words of Mama Fatou, the elderly woman who had sat beside him throughout the crisis. "God protects the innocent." Perhaps she was right, but he had learned that sometimes God works through the simple act of one person choosing to trust another, especially when they have every reason not to. The hijacking of Flight AF 726 would be remembered not for the crisis it created, but for the precedent it set, that even in the most dangerous circumstances, dialogue and understanding could triumph over fear and violence. And in a region too often defined by conflict, that was a lesson worth teaching even at 35,000 feet.